ذريتي ربنا وتقبل دعاء رب اجعلني مقيم الصلاة ومن ذريتي ربنا وتقبل دعاء ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب صدق الله العظيم. الفاتحة.
نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا ومولانا محمد صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم رسوله النبي الأمين المكين الحنين الكريم الرؤوف الرحيم. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله تعالى في شان حبيبه إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما تحب وترضى بأن تصلي عليه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإذ قال موسى لقومه إن الله يأمركم أن تذبحوا بقرة قالوا أتتخذنا هزوا قال أعوذ بالله أن أكون من الجاهلين. صدق الله العظيم وبلغنا رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك لمن الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Most respected ulama, my respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Over the past month or so, there has been a great deal of interest and a whole lot of marketing and a whole lot of videos that have appeared on YouTube and on various other social media platforms regarding what we know as the red heifers or the red cows or calves. Many of you will be aware of it and you've heard something about it, so I don't want to give you too much of the history in terms of what's going on and so on. These red heifers were specially reared in America and were brought to the illegitimate state of Israel around 2022. Because these red heifers in particular, 5 of them to be on the safe side, fulfilled all the criteria which has been presented according to the Jews in the Torah regarding the sacrifice that is required for the ritual purification of the Jewish people in general. And this ritual purification will then facilitate the process whereby Jewish people can become ceremonially pure, which will allow them access into what we know as the precincts, what they refer to as Temple Mount. Now, there's been a great deal of, conspiracy theories about it and, end of time issues and this and that and whatever it is. And it's something that is being taken very, very seriously, not only by the Jewish community, but particularly by the Christian evangelicals and Christian evangelists, as well as the Muslims, to such a degree that one of the spokesmen of Hamas, the Al-Qassam Brigade, had mentioned it in his 100-day speech, which actually, triggered the whole discussion in the Muslim community and has been spoken about during the month of Ramadan, and many scholars have spoken about it. So I'm going to give my, 5 shekels worth in terms of what this whole issue is, inshallah ta'ala. Now, coming to the Quran, in terms of this issue of the red heifer, the Holy Quran speaks about it firstly, let's start off with the surah. The longest surah in the Quran and the second surah after Surah Al-Fatiha is Surah Al-Baqarah, which is the calf. or the cow or the heifer. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you an entire story and an entire incident of which took place in the era of Sayyidina Musa Kalimullah alayhi salatu wasalam, of a murder of an innocent man, purely for the requirements and for the fulfillment of requirements of a greedy young man, his nephew, who wanted to inherit as quickly as possible. You can read the ayats in the Holy Quran, right? It's from the, verses number 70, from 69 onwards or whatever it is. You can read that. Time doesn't permit me to give you a tafsir of that right now. But the Quran alludes to it. And what has happened was that you had to buy a specific cow. This specifications that was given in the Holy Quran in particular was not because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demanded the specification. It was due, according to the Holy Quran, due to the arrogance and the stubbornness of the Jewish community, when they kept on asking, قَالُوا ادْعُ لَنَا رَبَّكَ يُبَيِّنْ لَنَا مَا هِيَ. What is this? قَالَ إِنَّهُ يَقُولُ إِنَّهَا بَقَرَةٌ لَا فَارِضٌ وَلَا بِكْرٌ. Right? That has never been tilled, and it's clean and pure. No. What color is it? It is a cow. That the Quran uses the word safra. And the Hebrew also has the word safra. Now, interestingly, when I checked up with the Jewish Virtual Library, they tell you in terms of how in the Hebrew language and Arabic language, the word safra is different as to what we know as yellow. We will refer to something as orange, we'll refer to something as yellow. If it is within the spectrum of orange and yellow, they're all regarded as yellow. So whether you call it a red heifer, or you call it safra, or whatever it is there, it is alluding to a specific type of animal with the specific requirements which has been clearly laid down in the Torah. It cannot have even one hair in it that is any other color except that hue of red, as we call it. The Jews call it para aduma in Hebrew. They call the red heifer the para aduma in Hebrew. Now, this is one indication in the Holy Quran of Surah Al-Baqarah. Longest surah in the Quran is referring to a heifer, named after the heifer. Yet there are so many other themes of Surah Al-Baqarah, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose this, number one. Number two, then there's another reference. And I remember this example wherein the heifer is to be slaughtered of Musa alayhi salam was to be slaughtered, and then they say the word Baqarah has two meanings. You see, it's one who is, Sayyidina Imam Muhammad Baqir is known as Baqirul Ulum. Baqarah in the Arabic word is also used to say something which is torn apart, something which is split, something we know which is severed, right? And in the Jewish procedures, in terms of finding out who a murderer was, right? And this was part of Jewish canonical law. If you found a person unknown to anybody, lying in a barren field, and he had been murdered, and you could not ascertain who the murderer was, then they would do a proper measurement in terms of which was the town closest to where the murder took place. And then the people out there had to go out and claim their innocence by slaughtering and sacrificing a red heifer with these specific requirements. And it was required to separate its body, its head, from the rest of the body. So they would go behind the red heifer, not as you would normally do. They would go behind the red heifer, and they would sacrifice the head from behind. It split it apart, tear it apart, literally. So Baqarah also means to tear apart. So the procedure that they engaged in, the Jewish people engaged in finding a killer or a murderer, and finding out who the murderer is of this innocent life over here, this was the procedure that took place. So this was called Igla Arufa. So the Holy Quran is alluding to this one in particular, Igla Arufa, to find out who the murderer of the killed person is. And the Quran is also giving you certain of the specification that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put down. It has not been yoked, it hasn't never tilled land, etc., which are the requirements of the red heifer. So Allah put down, because these were canonical laws, all of those it had some degree of similarity. Then you have the third cow. So there's plenty of holy cows in Judaism. Okay, so the third holy cow, which was actually sacrilegious, it was one of the greatest prohibitions that the Jews engaged in, was what we call the worship of the golden calf, which is in Surah Taha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the golden calf. قَالَ فَمَا خَطْبُكَ يَا سَامِرِي. If you look at the Bible, the whole blame is placed upon Sayyidina Harun alayhi salatu wasalam, astaghfirullah, that he is the one who actually created and built this gold calf. for the worship, and they said, this is your God. Whereas we know Harun alayhi salam is the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifies the matter in Holy Quran that Harun alayhi salam had nothing to do with this. Although the Jewish the Torah and so on speaks about the Samiri, and they also agree that he was a magician, etc. But the Bible casts the blame on Harun alayhi salatu wasalam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarified it in the Holy Quran that he had nothing to do with it. So Samiri created a golden calf, and he created a golden calf out of the earrings and the jewelry and the necklaces, not necessarily as they say from the Jewish people themselves, but those were some of the ornaments and the jewelry that the Jewish people took from Egypt, as well as from the corpses of the Egyptians, whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had caused to drown during the splitting of the sea, so to speak, and granted them passage. And when their bodies came ashore, these people took off their jewelry or whatever, awzaram min zinatil qawm. Allah says, these are awzaram min zinatil qawm, from another nation. Otherwise they said min zinatina, from our people. No, this was from the Egyptians, and it was their gold, and they cast this into fire, and they melted the gold, and Samiri turned this into a golden calf. Now, when he's asked, he lies. He said, how did you manage to create the billowing noise? Now, if you look at the Tafseer, if I may use the word, of the Jewish people, they will tell you that within the thing there, he created little holes, pinholes that you couldn't really see, but in strategic points. And what he eventually did is when the wind passed through, it would create this moving sound and this billowing sound. And he says, see, there's your God. When Musa alayhi salam returns, he sees his people, because what somebody told him, he said, hold on, Musa is not coming back. So he said, now you people are not worshipping the right God. The right God is the God that I have created, which is the golden calf. And they began to worship this. And Sayyidina Harun alayhi salam tried to stop them, but he couldn't do it. And thereafter, when Musa alayhi salam returned, he saw this, and Samiri gave the story. He said, no, qala basurtu bima lam yabsuru. I see that which you could not see. And he claimed that he saw the angel Jibreel, Amin alayhi salatu salam. And he says, wherever the horse of Jibreel alayhi salatu salam used to place his foot on the ground, that he used to turn green and verdant. So he said, faqabattu qabdatan min athari rasul. So I took out a handful of that soil and that area wherein the hooves of the horse of Jibreel Amin alayhi salam had touched, and I used that to bring life into the golden calf. We all know now what he had done, but he was trying to dupe the community into idolatry. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about these issues of the calf and the golden calf and what we call the egla arufa, to ascertain who the real murderers are, or who are the people responsible for the murder of an innocent victim lying there and so on. And thereafter, this was a process in the Jewish community. Now, the Jewish community itself will tell you, and the rabbis will tell you, and the scholars of the Torah will tell you, that one of the most difficult and the most confusing rituals to be found in the Torah is in Numbers, which is the sacrifice of the red heifer. And this is what has been grabbing everybody's attention. I wanted to give historical background from Quran, but now we're coming to the main aspect, which is affecting everybody. Now, what is the red heifer? Firstly, like I told you, it is known as para aduma in Hebrew, number one. Number two, only 9 heifers have been sacrificed since the time of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam until the destruction of the second temple in 70 AD. Only 9 heifers. This, right, that the 10th red heifer and the Maimonides and so on, they have predicted that when the 10th heifer is sacrificed, it would bring in the Messianic age, which means it will be the age of the Messiah, the arrival of the awaited Messiah. Now let me clarify one more thing. The awaited Messiah of the Jews and the awaited Messiah of the Christians, different story. Okay? The awaited Messiah of the Christians is Isa alayhi salatu salam. The awaited Messiah of the Jews is Masihud Dajjal, whether they realize it or not. Okay? This is where the Christian evangelicals have been roped in, and they also become part of the Temple Institute, because they are aware that the arrival and the second coming of Christ cannot take place until the third temple is rebuilt. That will precipitate the arrival and the second coming of Isa ala nabiyyina wa alayhi salatu wassalam. So the Jews have roped in, and these are from Jewish sources, they have roped in the Christians into saying, look here, you need to support us in our destruction of Masjid al-Aqsa and the reconstruction of the third Temple Mount, on Temple Mount, because if that doesn't take place, Christ is not going to come back. So there was actually an article or a book written, right, forcing God's hand. what they are saying there is that, by them genetically engineering these red heifers, they are literally now forcing God's hand to say, well, you know what, let's fast track the process of the arrival of Isa alayhi salam, because once the red heifer comes in, then we can spring into action. Now what happens? Interestingly, this red heifer has not been sacrificed for 2,000 years. The last time the red heifer was sacrificed, the ninth red heifer was sacrificed 2,000 years ago. Predates Islam by almost 600 years. Right. The Jewish rabbis themselves, and there is a Jewish rabbi who's been saying this. He says, we ourselves don't know what exactly the process should be, because it took place 2,000 years ago. Whatever information they've had, they put it all together and whatever it is. Now, what is the significance of this thing here? It is so significant that during the month of Adura, one of the last prayers that the Jews engage in before Passover, Pesach, which is equivalent to our Ashura. Pay attention. Equivalent to our Ashura, Pesach, Passover. They have a special Shabbat which is called Shabbat Para. It is now so named because of the additional scripture read in the synagogue, which centers on a unique ritual purification through a rare creature, a cow born entirely red. They've been breeding it for 2,000 years. And it's part of their ritual prayer that they do just before Passover. And Passover is going to be taking place now towards the end of April and maybe the first few days of May. I'm not too sure exactly what date it would be, but that's when it's going to be taking place. And if the red heifers are to be sacrificed, they will be sacrificed at this time, literally in about 3 weeks' time from now. And already, I'm sure you've seen the pictures on social media and so on. They've created one, what I want to call it, a mimbar, pulpit, right, upon which the red heifers, climb up almost like a Jewish escalator, so to speak, to get them onto the top. And you can't just sacrifice them anywhere. They will be sacrificed on Mount Olives. Now, for those who just came from Al-Aqsa, I know many of you did, Mount Olives is a cross. If you see Qibli Masjid, and if you look across Qibli Masjid, you will see Mount of Olives around. And the distance between Mount Olives and Al-Aqsa compound is only 800 meters. Now, can you imagine the scene if that has to take place? All I'm going to tell you, sir, in the words of Bart Simpson, when you see those things happening, don't have a cow, man. Just relax. Say, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Okay? So, this is happening. These guys are hell-bent on it. The Temple Institute are the forerunners in this issue. And mind you, although there's no official statement from the illegitimate state of Israel's government, departments and whatever it is, all of them have been behind this issue. Therefore, it's gaining so much of traction. Now, what is required? What is so important with the red heifer that not one single red heifer has been sacrificed in 2,000 years? What does it do? I'm going to read for you what it does. The red heifer in Jewish history is unblemished, never before yoked animal that was slaughtered and burned to restore ritual purity to those who had become unclean through contact with the dead. The Surah Al-Baqarah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, if you find out who the killer, the murderer is there, then you got to sacrifice the animal, etc., with the same qualifications and same description or whatever it is, and then it will point out for you the dead, because the Quran gives the example that when it was touched by that cow, the dead person was brought back to life again. This is Quran, brought back to life again, and the dead person who was brought back to life again then pointed out the murderer. Now, the red heifer, according to the red heifer, is critical because if you come into contact with a corpse, if you touch a corpse, you become ritually impure. And you can only become purified not by ghusl, but by being anointed with spring water and the ashes of this red heifer. So when the red heifer will be slaughtered close to Passover, which is in about 3 weeks' time, and they'll have the special altar, which will take it up to the Mount of Olives, if they so intend doing so. Allahu Alam. Goes on to the top, you've got to have special priests. And this is what is important. Special priests who have been, literally been training for this. And every aspect of this has to be done. And you have special Kohens, right? Kohens, who have been prepared for years on end, who have been preparing for this moment, who are the only people qualified to engage in the sacrifice of the red heifer. When the red heifer is slaughtered, it won't only be slaughtered. it will then be burnt with its blood. A little bit of the blood will be placed on what would be called the tabernacle in the Temple Mount. Now, the interesting point is, even the Jews are talking about this. And say, one of the rabbis said, he said, we ourselves are not even sure exactly where Temple Mount was. You know, the Jewish temple, we're not even sure exactly, where it starts and where it ends. It's just conjecture. They themselves admit this. They don't even know exactly where the tabernacle was either. Right? So, it's like guesswork here, there, whatever it is. So they acknowledge that we don't know exactly. That's why they've been digging under to find can we find out the remnants that we can see? The original temple of Sulaiman alayhi salam is Al-Aqsa. The second one that was built on those ruins. Now you want to come up with a third one. Okay, never mind. Let's go for it. So they don't know themselves. So some of the blood has to be there. Once the heifer is burnt, then the ashes are to be mixed with what they would call it, cedar wood, hyssop, and a few others. And it's mixed. And this is mixed with spring water from a special specific spring. And there are special children who have been brought up and reared to actually go there and do this. And this water will be sprinkled with ash water on the temple. Before that, even without the presence of an actual architectural temple, the ceremony of turning this ash mixed with spring water will be so critical, because before you even build, and this is the important point, before you even build the third temple, if you have that ash of that sacred heifer mixed with that water sacrificed by the Kohens and with these purified children who can actually do the entire ritual and process, this process of you being anointed will then require that the general population will be cleansed, thus removing any religious prohibition of a Jewish presence on Temple Mount. I want to repeat that. Have you noticed? Jews haven't been entering Masjidul Aqsa. Reason being, they believe that they are ceremonially impure. They are napak. They can only be purified with the ash and the water of the red heifer. So for 2,000 years, they've been standing at the Wailing Wall. They're not getting in. A handful of the guys, they have been going in there just to check out, just to warn everybody we're doing it. So there hasn't been an en masse entry into the Al-Aqsa compound before, because the rabbis have stopped them. They said, until this doesn't take place, until you are not ceremonially purified with the red heifer's ashes and the water mixed and so on there, you can't enter. But once you are anointed, then you become pak. Then you can enter. Now can you imagine? 100,000 people. And by the way, once you do it, these ashes are preserved and remain sacred for up to 100 years. Did you understand that? So what happens now? You got the ashes. You can just continue adding purified spring water to it, and people can continuously be anointed for another 100 years. Way beyond our time. But this will allow, this anointment with this red heifer's ashes will allow any Jewish person who's been blessed with that ash and water to now enter Al-Aqsa compound. And the plan is that once people start doing this en masse, the Temple Institute that has been behind this has already said, within a few years thereafter, we will not only destroy Al-Aqsa, we will already have the third temple built. Now do you understand the problem? Now do you understand the problem? For 2,000 years, they've been waiting and waiting and planning. Finally, whether they genetically modified it or not, to be on the safe side, they didn't pick up one red heifer, they picked up 5. So it shows that they intend doing this. Allahu A'lam. But this is from a, what we would call it, from an eschatological perspective, from a messianic perspective, the issue. Now, once this takes place and is en masse entry into Al-Aqsa, is not going to take very long, considering Al-Aqsa, for all intents and purposes, is basically under the control of the Zionists in the first place. With the exception of the inner precinct, which is ostensibly is, under control of the Waqf Foundation, Awqaf and so on there. But I've been there in about a few years ago, right? Everything around there with all the cameras and everything, they got it under control. They got it in check. For them to take over and engage in a siege of Al-Aqsa won't take them more than 2 hours. That's it. And thereafter, and I've been talking about, I said, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Whether if this attempt fails, even if they don't storm Al-Aqsa immediately, the fact that they fulfilled all the religious obligations in terms of the red heifer and the ritual ceremonial purification that is required for the Jewish people to enter into Temple Mount, it's more than sufficient. They can wait for a year after that. They can wait for 100 years, but they've got the license to do so now. You see, that's the main issue over here. And our Muslims, whether we are, we're going to take it with a pinch of salt or whatever it is inside there, we don't know. But these people are very serious about this matter. Okay? Now, when Al-Aqsa is destroyed, it will then be purified with this, because all the garments, all the utensils, everything that is required for worship to commence in what they call Temple Mount can only be purified, and the garments can only be purified by those who work in Temple Mount, by the Kohens and so on there, right? Will only take place once that happens. And once that happens, then they can engage in all their ritual worship in the compound which we know as Al-Aqsa. Already, they've been showing their videos to say, look here, we are already in the compound, and they're showing, look here, this is what we are doing. The plans are out, all of this. Whether it's just red herring, red heifer, I don't know. The point here is, it is something that we have to wait and see in the next 2 or 3 weeks how things play out. Obviously, the so-called Israeli media has been, been keeping a distance away from the issue. But Al Jazeera pulled out an article about 2 or 3 days ago. Up until then, I was a bit skeptical. I said, you get all these guys on YouTube and TikTok, who'll be, making these conspiracy theories fly. But when I picked up Al Jazeera's issue, I said, hey, if Al Jazeera is picking up this matter and the Times of Israel is speaking about this, like you see, the conservative Jews are not making a big fuss about it, but the evangelicals are, number one. Number two is that the modern Jews, so to speak, don't give too much of emphasis to these ritual sacrifices, and what we call the secular Jews don't give too much of emphasis to these sacrifices because they regard it as archaic or whatever it is. But the hardcore extremist, fundamentalist Christian evangelicals and the Jewish, hardcore extremist Zionists, if I may use the term, Zionists are the one who are pushing for this matter because they just need a trigger. They just need something to trigger this process. And what's going to happen? Al-Aqsa is going to go. Al-Aqsa is going to go. And it's a reality. It can only be liberated. Al-Aqsa, from eschatological perspective, Al-Aqsa will once again only be liberated first by its conquest by Imam Muhammad al-Mahdi. And Isa alayhi salatu wasalam will then, so to speak, seal that liberation and conquest by taking on the whole matter. And this is where it becomes interesting between the Christians and the Jews. The Jews have been egging on the Christians to say, look here, if you want your Messiah to come, the second coming of Christ to come, you need to have this red heifer. We need to be in control of the temple. We need to have Temple Mount, the third temple built, etc., etc., etc. But that's where they differ. The second coming for the Christians is Isa alayhi salam. The Jews are waiting for their awaited Messiah. They awaited Messiah. And the only awaited Messiah is the Antichrist. Whether they accept it or they reject it. And the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has already stated that Dajjal is their Antichrist, their Messiah. Masihud Dajjal, he is their Messiah. And they will be his fundamental army that will stand up and fight and come to the border of Al-Madinatul Munawwara, that will come and fight in terms of Al-Aqsa. And Isa alayhi salam will finally liberate Al-Aqsa and the entire area of Sham when he, as Christ, destroys the Antichrist. And where will it take place? What we call, when you call it Armageddon, where will it take place? It will take place in Lud, which is known as Lod. Ben Gurion Airport is within the precincts of those areas. He'll be trying to flee. Isa alayhi salam will then destroy. And he said, when Masih al-Dajjal sees me, he will start to, so to speak, dissolve the way salt dissolves in water. All of these things are realities. So if you think things are bad right now, I'm telling you right now, I'm calling it, so to speak. Al-Aqsa is going. In one form or the other, Al-Aqsa is going to be going. And as I said, these evangelicals, in terms of the article that was written, they're trying to force God's hand. They can be wamakaru, wa makar Allah. You plan, you engage in your strategies and whatever it is, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plans. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so wills, nothing may come of this. If it is a divine decree that this is going to now facilitate and now, be almost like a catalyst for these eschatological events to start taking place, so be it. And from the way I've been watching events unfolding since the past 6 months with the incursion on Gaza, which has been unprecedented in terms of, the consistent barrage and the consistent demolition of the area of Gaza by the Zionist army. And the fact that some of the predictions of the Holy Prophet Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam have become such stark realities in the past 6 months alone. It gives you something to be concerned about. But we'll wait and see. Inshallah ta'ala, let's see what happens. But the point here is the Muslim Ummah has to be vigilant. It could just be one of those, issues. But the fact that these people have been working on this for the past 3 years, from 2022, and they're waiting for this, and it's fulfilling all the requirements and so on, it gives it some degree of credence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect this ummah, inshallah ta'ala. Allah protect Al-Aqsa. Allah protect the people of Palestine. Like I mentioned yesterday in my Eid khutbah, remember, the army of Allah that will be victorious, and no harm can be done to that army of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala till the day of Qiyamah, is the army of the people of Masjidul Aqsa, Baytul Maqdis wa Aknafiha. That's the army of God. Don't look at them without their weapons. Don't look at them in the condition that they are in right now. They have always been and they will continue to be the army of Allah. According to Muslim Imam, the Prophet of Allah, Ya Rasulullah, which is this army that will stand for truth, that will always be victorious, and nobody can cause them harm? Even if the world were to get together to come and destroy them, Rasulullah said, he said, minhum min Baytil Maqdis wa aknafu Baytil Maqdis. They are from Masjidul Aqsa and the surrounding areas of Al-Aqsa. And there's the proof. Less than 2 million people. Less than 2 million people are protecting 2 billion Muslims. Not with guns, not with missiles, not with rockets, purely with their resilience, purely with their faith, purely with their istiqamah, steadfastness, purely with their courage, purely with their sabr, purely with their ribat, isbiru, wasabiru, warabitu. And the Zionist army, backed by the so-called superpower of the world and the rest of the Germans and the British and all of these people, can't bring them down. They can't bring them down. So trust me, you don't need a big army to fight them. The people of Al-Aqsa and its surrounding areas are more than enough. We have to hide behind them. We have to hide behind them. Allah has chosen them for this. Allah has chosen them for this. So as the events unfold, inshallah, Allahu alam, but Allah has got His army ready. And Allah will protect them, inshallah ta'ala. And by virtue of them, Allah protect us, inshallah. Wa ma'ali billah. Very important announcement tonight, inshallah ta'ala, with a lot of fervent behind the scenes efforts. Alhamdulillah, jazakallah to Dr. Majra in particular. We will have Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor here this evening after Isha Salah. And she's going to give us an update. She's going to give us an update onto what is going on in terms of the situation with Gaza and the illegitimate state of Israel and the ICJ rulings and all of these matters. So I request you to please bring our mothers and sisters along as well. And please come here to get an update from our minister, inshallah ta'ala, this evening, tonight. Right? So just keep your calendar open or clear your calendar for today. Inshallah ta'ala, she'll only be speaking for about half an hour. By 8:15 we're done. But please, we need to honor this minister of ours, and I'm going to tell you why. She is the red heifer in the Muslim community. No, I'm serious. She's the red heifer in the Muslim. She didn't only do as a minister for this country, as a minister of this country. She's the red heifer. Why? What the entire Muslim ummah couldn't do, to take the Zionist state of Israel to court and hold them accountable, that one red heifer from the Muslim ummah did it. Do you understand that? We're not talking in her capacity as a minister of this country or the representative of the South African government or the representative of South African citizens. As a member of this ummah, nobody could do it. This one red heifer did it. So this is our red heifer. So please support her today, inshallah ta'ala, and be here so that we may be updated. And we would like to honor her by, by showing our support for whatever she has done, not only as a minister, but most importantly, as a Muslimah and a member of our ummah, inshallah.